Pedal to the floor, no more feet in the door. Gonna drive right out of this bitter night.
Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I've worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years. In those years, I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes take for granted. This is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. Before we begin, I do want to give a special shout out to Lucy. Lucy's visiting from New York City over the weekend, and I just wanted to say hi to her. I guess I'm allowed to do that, aren't I? The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. Today we have Kim Moody. Kim is the Executive Director of the Disability Rights Center. Hi, Kim.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, it's great to have you. So the weather outside's gorgeous.
Yes, it is.
It's amazing how many guests really want to do the weather when we say to them, would you like to do the weather? Yeah.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. So what would you describe the Disability Rights Center being? How would you describe it?
I would describe the Disability Rights Center as being Maine's protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities.
And what does that mean?
That means that we are statewide providing legal representation and advocacy services and training and outreach to people with disabilities from the tip top of Maine to the bottom and from west to east. And we are seeking change, public policy change, and good stuff to happen for people with disabilities.
So when you talk about legal issues and advocacy, without breaking any confidentiality things, what type of things would you be working with?
Well, we touch many, many issues. The most important and the reason that we were created in 1977 by Congress was really to ensure that Mainers with disabilities and all across the country are not abused and or exploited or neglected. And so our primary focus needs to be rooting out abuse and neglect, exploitation. That comes first. And then after that, David, everything: employment discrimination, housing discrimination, helping people find work and keep work, access to affordable and accessible health care, special education services, assistive technology devices, you name it, we're on it.
Okay. So you have lawyers on your staff?
Yes.
Okay, so you're one of the few nonprofits who really provide like legal services to clients.
That's what we do, right.
And how does a client find out about you? Or how does someone with a disability find out about you?
Well, programs like this, as well as we try to do as much outreach as we possibly can within the schools, within the provider organizations, all across the state at every conference. We've been around since 1977, so we're pretty well known in the disability movement, if you will. But we advertise. We have an 800 number, of course, and a website, of course, and Facebook now. And we have staff who really are in the offices and in the provider organizations all across this state. So the point is to make sure that everybody knows about us.
As an executive director of an organization like yours, what do you see some of the challenges being?
I think the greatest challenge that I face is glaring and in my face every day, and that is the limited resources to really be able to do everything that we know that we should be doing. So I think you know that we have discrete and specific and actually pretty narrow funding that mandates us to provide specific advocacy services to people with labels of particular disabilities or in areas of substance like assistive technology, voting. So we have this discrete money to represent people based on their label or their disability, and then this other discrete funding to represent people based on an issue that they are facing, substantive issue.
Can you give an example?
Well, what I was going to talk about is the challenge is that we are acutely aware that we're not everywhere we need to be. For example, there are lots of children with disabilities incarcerated in our juvenile detention facilities, and we don't know if they're getting the adequate educational services that they need. We know that there are pre-adjudicated or unadjudicated youth that are being held that don't have any access to educational services, and we don't feel like we're even touching that. we could be doing far more around special education services for kids with disabilities. We don't have funding. That's the challenge of the lack of resources from the federal government to do any special education services. So we cobble together some funds, and the legislature gives us some money to be, so we have two top-notch lawyers that try to be ubiquitous, try to be in every school system, but they can't possibly do that.
Right. Maine's a huge state.
Right. So healthcare, I mean, I think we would love to do more in healthcare. We would love to do more to make sure that every person with a disability knows that they have a right to vote and has access to the polls, and so on and so on. There are many places.
So do you do outside fundraising besides what the state and feds give you?
We do some. We have a dinner every year. So in October, that's our big event that we put on, and that raises several $1,000s that we can use then because it's unrestricted money. As I mentioned before, all of our money is so narrowly restricted to particular activities that there are a whole host of things that we find that we cannot do. I mean, we know that there are a lot of immigrants, for example, in Maine right now, and in any population, there are people with disabilities, both youth and adults with disabilities, and we'd like to be doing more there, too.
So, you and I have had some discussions, earlier on, and, I have issues with the term advocacy, because it's so broadly defined. How would you define your agency in being an advocate? How does that work?
That's interesting. I mean, our agencies across this country are actually called protection and advocacy agencies by Congress in the federal statutes. So I remember
and again, that's my personal shtick.
Well, I remember when, I've been at this for 30 years, and I remember when the word advocate was really referred only to us, in this state at least, and suddenly, lots of people were calling themselves advocates. So I had a similar reaction, like, you're not an advocate, you're a provider. However, I think that, in response to your question about how we advocate, it really is about the expressed interest of our clients and the people that we serve rather than the best interest. A lot of people think that they're advocates when they are working to make change for people that they think needs to happen, the change that they think needs to happen, where I define advocacy as I ask you what it is that you want and need, you express that to me, and my job then is to not judge that. And perhaps I might not even think it's the best thing for you. My job is to push your agenda forward.
Right.
So that's personal advocacy, but also at the State House, within the Public Policy Forum, to really speak for and with a group of individuals, in this case, individuals with disabilities, to create positive change.
This might be a loaded question, but it's been bugging me. Do you get resistance from service providers, from the general community? I mean, are they open to this?
I think that, generally speaking, most people who are either in the public sector or are in the private sector running provider agencies believe and understand that vulnerable peoples need to have advocates and need to have people that help speak for them. But yes, we get a lot of resistance. and
we want to think about that?
Yeah. You asked the question about whether we do a lot of outside fundraising, and bottom line, David, we are not touchy-feely, and so it's difficult to get private money because nobody really likes lawyers a whole lot anyway, and so to give money to lawyers to sue people who are violating the rights of people with disabilities is a difficult sell.
But you have other programs besides the lawyer piece and the advocacy, don't you?
No.
No, that's it, 100%.
That's it. That's what we do.
So how are you addressing some of the challenges that you're facing?
I think that's a constant, I wouldn't say battle. I have the best job in the world. I'm lucky. It's constant work. We have 30 fantastic staff members at the Disability Rights Center, all who are really committed to doing this work. So, it's been difficult. It's always been difficult to keep lawyers, for example, because they're really qualified and fantastic, they can go elsewhere and make a lot more money. They can go into private practice and make a lot more money. So that the board of directors and I have addressed by trying to increase salaries of the lawyers, but there's only so much money, and so that's the other constant challenge that the non-lawyer advocates don't make anywhere near what they're worth. So, so we're constantly trying to look at fairness, look at how to keep people on, and look at how to support them. So we have a really tight team of 30 folks from all around the state who come together monthly to share war stories and to share learning and training opportunities. And we have a monthly staff training. So I don't know. I mean, I think we're always looking within at the same time for quality improvement, looking within the organization while we obviously are mandated and empowered to be looking outside.
So in a lot of these meetings and planning processes, do you include people with disabilities?
Oh, yes. People with disabilities have to be part of everything that we do. Federal law requires that, for example, our board of directors has to be a majority, 51% at least, people with disabilities, and down through the organization. Of course, we're always looking to hire people with disabilities, and so seek people with disabilities when we're filling a position. The training that we do with people with disabilities. The events that we put on, we always like to make sure that people with disabilities are right there at the table. So yes.
The challenges, because they're so statewide, I want to come back to that, but this is the point of the show where we ask our guests a trivia question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and you have not been told the question beforehand.
No, I have not.
So I'm going to ask you the question, then we'll do our mid-break, and then we'll take it from there. Why was 1973 a turning point in disability rights?
Because the Rehabilitation Act passed.
You're not supposed to answer it yet.
Oh, sorry.
No, you threw off my timing.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, now I'm flustered. This is David Unger on Nonprofit Insider, and we're on WMPG 90.9, Southern Maine and Eastern New Hampshire. That was the quickest answer we've had. So I won't even give you the answer that I showed here. Let's go back to some of the challenges, and we'll try and get back on track here. Live radio, you can't beat it, right? So let's talk about how you would compare yourself to other nonprofits. Do you see yourself and the challenges that you have different or similar? Let's keep funding out of it.
Yeah, I think that they're very similar. My belief around nonprofits is that we fill a huge gap that between the public sector and the private sector, that we are a necessary group of organizations, and that are innovators and that are problem solvers and that are not afraid to, I guess, identify problems that society faces, to look them right square in the face, those problems, and to bring the public's attention to those problems and to shine a light on those and then to attack them. And so I think in that way we are all the same and that we have the same challenges. I also think that given that we are paid by taxpayer dollars and other people's...
Your specific agency.
Yeah,
okay.
All nonprofits, I think.
No.
Well, no, I didn't finish. Taxpayer dollars or other people's money, private money, or foundation money, that we have a special responsibility to ensure that we are spending that money as carefully and as well as we can. So I don't think that we have, I mean, I'm sure that's true in private business too, that we don't have the luxury of, for example, keeping people around who aren't pulling their weight.
Right. Let's go back to the funding piece a little bit, because if you had the opportunity to speak on live radio to talk about why someone should contribute to the Disability Rights Center, knowing how hard it is to get private dollars because it's lawyers, what would you say to them to convince them? And just pretend we're on live radio doing this.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, from my perspective, of course, the Disability Rights Center is protecting what I consider to be Maine's most vulnerable population. Oftentimes people who cannot speak for themselves, who don't have a voice, who aren't mobile, who don't have any say in what happens during their day. And I guess today I would say that you ought to consider funding us, because one of the things that we really need to be doing more are unannounced site visits all over this state, from Fort Kent to Elliott, from Aquasic to Machias. We need to have the resources to drive to these places and show up. Congress has given us the access authority to do so. So we are allowed to show up wherever people with disabilities are living or working or spending their days. And so we can't do that right now with the limited people that we have. So we need to be doing that. We need to be making sure and ensuring that people with disabilities are not being abused or exploited, and making sure that they're having meaningful days, not just sitting around, and that the services that we're all paying for are leading towards something, preferably employment.
So what happens if you go to a service provider unannounced and you walk into the day program and you see some violation? What do you do?
Well, there are a couple of things that we can do. We have the authority to file a complaint without a client, so we can do that. More often than not, though, we want to have a client. So if we walk into a day program and we see a violation, we might catalog that for a moment, and then begin to meet people and talk to people. How's it going for you here? Do you like it here? What might you change here? That kind of thing, and develop a relationship with a potential client. But, I was an advocate for many years, too, and if I walk into a place and see a violation, I am going to walk right up to the administrator of that facility and have a conversation about that violation. That's really what I found always to be the easiest and best way to address problems, just to highlight them and to talk to people about them. 1% of the cases that come to us actually end in litigation. Most everything is figured out way before we get there.
And I'm guessing that the majority of the violations, and I could be totally wrong on this, are violations that people don't even realize are violations, where it's kind of innocent. Or am I totally wrong?
That's nice.
I guess I'm wrong.
No, I don't know. I think that's really it's possible in many places, but I think that with the media, with the world that we live in now, that there's access to training and access to information, and if you're receiving funds to provide services to people with disabilities, you should know what's right and what's wrong and what the law says. But I think you're right that, for example, a private employer might never have had access to anything to do with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, so might not know at all that it's not okay to say, what is your disability? Why are you acting that way?
Right.
Or you can't work here because we don't like people with that label of disability. So yes, that's our job, to make sure that they know.
I mean, and I know over the past couple of weeks since I started doing the show that I've been mentioned several times that I've been very entrenched in the last few months in the disability community, and that the work you do is just amazing. I mean, the more I hear and the more that I see and the more touches that I see that you're making is just phenomenal. What would happen if you close your doors tomorrow?
Oh. I don't know. I would like to think that, when I started doing this work in my 20s, I really believed that disability advocates across this nation could work ourselves out of jobs. I really believed that money for advocacy shouldn't be necessary, that money should go back into the system to help people get jobs or to help people have safe and affordable housing, so on and so forth. Right. It hasn't happened. What I'd like to think is that we've done enough, and in Maine, and Maine has come a long way. We're far superior in terms of our disability service system to other states.
There's no question about that.
Yes. So, I'd like to think it would keep on keeping on in terms of people moving towards employing people with disabilities and not discriminating against people with disabilities. But I don't know. We have more work than we can handle, so I tend to think that we might see some backsliding.
Okay. Describe for me and our listeners one of the great successes you've had, or a program that you're really proud about
Oh, it's funny. I think, as I said before, our programs are discrete and they are intended to serve certain people with disabilities or labels of disability or areas. So we are everywhere from voting rights to habilitation services to rehabilitation services and medical care, all of that. And I think that in terms of thinking about a program, that's impossible for me because our challenge is to help undo I'm going to make up a word, I think, but the siloization of disability.
I heard that word last week.
Did you really? Okay, good. So, we know people with disabilities and the funding follows the disability or the label of disability. So people are in their disability group largely, and that hasn't worked for any of us because we are competing for the same policy makers' attention, competing for the same funding, and so on and so forth. So our challenge at the Disability Rights Center, because we are completely cross-disability, is to not have a program, even though there are people that work just in particular programs, like just for people with developmental disabilities. Our challenge is to make sure that it doesn't matter who you work for as an advocate or an attorney, that you're aware of what's going on for people with disabilities broadly all across this state. What are people facing, and what are those issues? So what am I very proud of? I think the staff are incredible, that they work so hard, and we've just had some amazing successes on our cases too. I mean, we have the class action lawsuit against the what's now Riverview Psychiatric Center, which was filed so many years ago that it's still kind of hanging out there. That's not something.
They were just in the news again today.
Yes. So that used to be a common thing for the protection and advocacy agencies to look at bigger issues and to file class action lawsuits. Now, I think that the individual successes where I have an attorney walking into my office and saying, this case settled, he's going to get the services, or she kept her job, or she's not being evicted from her housing. I mean, those are daily, David. I mean, it's just,
that's great.
It's never bad.
That's great. Have you had an aha moment in your career that was a life changer for you? That made a difference in how you changed your direction in running the agency? That's a new question I've added into.
That's a great question. I am planning on thinking about that question a lot because I think that's important to really see. I guess for me, it was working, this is probably not politically correct either, but working at the Disability Rights Center when it wasn't exactly the most functional of organizations. And then having the opportunity as a young woman, the board of directors put me in as the acting executive director. They were paying me about $25,000 less than the man who had been the director before me, and they kept me as acting for a year. And boy, oh boy, was that, I mean, the opportunity of a lifetime for me. And I know that people move around a lot in their careers, but this, like I said before, this is just the opportunity to see people with disabilities now at every single table, when it was the Disability Industrial Complex spoke for people with disabilities when I first came into this. So I guess, I mean, I appreciate the question. I will think about it more for myself, but definitely just as a young woman seeing, wow, I have the potential here to hire the very best people and to give them what they need to do their jobs so that they can change the world for people with disabilities. This little teeny piece of the world, but nevertheless.
And I think it was Tom Peters who said the only constant is change itself.
Yeah. Yep.
I live by that quote.
Yeah, me too.
So, do you have any questions for me? Aha.
No, I didn't know I'd have that opportunity to.
I don't announce that. Okay, I think we have a call-in.
Mm-hmm.
We do. We had a caller who called in and asked, he's a behavioral health worker, and he wanted to just say that he wanted to address the fact that there's a huge lack of acknowledgement of the role of the behavioral health worker in the quality of life for folks who are receiving, SSI and who are otherwise declared disabled. And he says that they have very low wages. It's even less than working at a fast food place, and he says that it's very hard. Wonders if you'd answer a question about the food stamps reduction and the cost of living, lack of cost of living raises for SSI people, and how that affects your clients.
Oh, I guess that's
it's a lot of stuff.
4 or 5 part question.
It may only be one question, but he wanted to get all those points
yes.
in. So,
well, with regard to the pay of direct care workers, he's absolutely right. That's abysmal. And I have been in this business for a very long time, so I've heard that a million times. And when I worked as an advocate in facilities, including at Riverview Psychiatric Center, what was then AMHI, something I heard a lot too. And I have the luxury as an advocate, this is why this is the best job in the world, because I have the luxury of saying, I am advocating for the clients with disabilities. You get to go home at night. Yeah, it's a low-paid, lousy job, but my clients don't get to go home at night always. So that's my job. I'm on the side of making sure that I can acknowledge that you're paid very poorly, but my job is to make sure that you're treating my clients with dignity and respect. So I'm not in the fight to increase those wages. But with regard to the lack of increases in SSI payments, yes, that definitely hurts our clients. People are very poor, and I don't like SSI. I think people should have jobs, because once people are put on SSI, it's a prescription for a lifetime of poverty.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap up on that one. See, you had an opportunity to ask me a question.
I know. I did.
You have a quick one?
I really don't. I can't think of anything right now.
All right. Well,
I'm glad you're doing this show. I think it's great.
Well, again, it'll be posted online, and you can share it with anybody that you want. And Kim Moody, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was great.
It was good. Next week, we will have Amy Thomas. Amy is the Executive Director of the Sexual Assault Response Services of Southern Maine. The music appears courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You can find it on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see where he's playing this weekend. Thanks to Deb Danger, NPI's executive engineer. You can catch Deb on Morning Street, Fridays at 6:30 a.m. If you know of a nonprofit that should be on the show, please email me at npi@davidunger.net. Past shows are archived at www.tcmgr.com NP Insider tab.